Hello and welcome to Firearm Freedom. This is going to be another versus video. In today's versus video, we are looking at a 45 1911 versus a 9mm 1911. As always, there are links down in the description where you can support what I do here on the channel. The main way you can do that right now is by purchasing one of my awesome new t-shirts from my Firearm Freedom merchandise store. That is the very first link down in the description. If you want to check out the shirt I was wearing throughout this video, that is in there. And if you are looking to not be censored here on YouTube and you want to see my content, commenting down below, hitting the like button, hitting the subscribe button, all of that stuff should help out the algorithms and also make sure that these videos are not hidden from your subscription feed. All of that support I seriously appreciate. I know the first question that a lot of people are going to have is, where in the world did you get the licensing for nuclear warheads on the tabletop review? All joking aside, all 45 jokes aside, we are going to be doing what I consider a rather interesting comparison. And when we're looking at 1911s, there are a wide variety of different calibers, but primarily you're going to see a 9mm variation, which we have here in this Springfield 1911 Range Officer variation, and you're also going to see primarily 45 1911s, and once again we have that represented by a Springfield 1911 A1 loaded. Now, when we are looking at these two, the reason why I chose Springfield is simply because I have two of them in the collection, and it was kind of a perfect comparison because I have one in 9mm and one in 45. So I chose 1911s that were as close as I could find in the collection for overall features. I am definitely not a huge fan of their company politically or anything like that. I'm trying to simply separate the company from the product. Typically, for the price point, their 1911s, especially their older made in the US 1911s, are actually pretty good. And these two variations, I have separate reviews of each of these guns on my channel. I will try to post both of them in a card up in the right hand corner of your screen, and they've performed great. I've not had a single issue with either 1911. Right off the bat, what are the differences between these two 1911s? Both of these are built off a Series 70 frame, and typically what that means on a 1911, if you rack the slide back, it is not going to have a safety plunger in the slide. So as you can see there, it's just a standard slide, and I actually don't know that I have a Series 80 in the collection. I prefer Series 70s 1911s. They typically, without that little safety plunger, the trigger is going to be a little bit better, a little bit smoother, a little bit lighter. Not always. I've compared them both side by side, and I have yet to really see a huge difference. But both of these are built on that same Series 70 design, and they both have a very similar flared beaver tail, skeletonized hammer, and also enlarged safety. The main difference is that the loaded on the 45 has an ambidextrous safety, whereas the Range Officer does not. And then also, they both do not have any front strap checkering. However, I have been using a small section of Talon grip tape that I just cut to size and stuck right in the front. It is the more aggressive sandpaper-like grip tape, and quite frankly, this is a huge upgrade in overall shootability of these 1911s, and because I did it on one, for the sake of comparison in this video, of course I did it on the other one, but I'm going to be keeping this on both guns. It may not look as great as front strap checkering, but it definitely feels about the same, and front strap checkering, in my opinion, seriously improves the shootability of a 1911. So both of them now have that, and the only other difference was with sights, and that really did play a part in the overall comparison of the back roll that you're going to be seeing. The Range Officer has blacked out target sights, and the loaded has standard 3-dot Novak white sights. Some other basic differences that you'll generally see with a 9mm 1911 versus a 45 is capacity. So right out of the gate, a 9mm 1911 with the flush fitting magazine is typically going to be 9 rounds, whereas a flush fitting magazine for a 45 1911 is going to be 7 rounds. So you're getting 2 extra rounds with a factory magazine, which is always kind of nice to have. +1 gives you 10, +1 over here gives you 8. Now, most people, myself included, are going to have the slightly extended base plate magazines, which are going to give you 8 rounds in the 45, which is much more comparable to the factory magazine in the 9mm. Now, typically, when you see the slightly extended Wilson Combat 9mm magazines, that's going to give you 10 rounds. The overall capacity is most definitely better in the 9mm when we're looking at the first comparison. There are 10-round mags available for the 45 1911. That's going to stick out pretty far. I run 10-round Wilson Combat mags quite frequently, and they are nice to have, but the overall size is still much different and much larger than 10 rounds in a 9mm 1911. And also, even though you have the same steel frame and steel slide on both options here, the weight difference is most definitely noticeable when you have a fully loaded 10-round 45 1911 versus a fully loaded 10-round 9mm 1911. With a 9mm 1911 compared to a 45, the nice thing is that almost always the frame and slide are identical. It is the exact same slide, it is the exact same frame. So when you are looking at safeties, when you are looking at triggers, when you're looking at grip panels, and all of those other things that you can get for a 1911, it is going to be the exact same parts. So that is most definitely a positive. However, when it comes to magazines, I will say, I typically see magazines, and a variety of magazines, I'll say, much more available for a 45. Now, when you go online, it's going to be very similar. You're going to be able to find Wilson Combat magazines pretty regularly, but when you're going in a gun shop, you are almost always going to see 45 1911 magazines just available, a lot of the times in a variety. Whereas it's much more difficult to find 9mm 1911s, at least what I generally see. So in this case, magazine availability I will give to the 45. And the other thing I'll say is that because the 45 1911 has been around for quite a bit longer than 9mm 1911s, you're generally seeing a wider variety of 45 magazines. When we're looking at holsters, they're essentially matched. When we are comparing, once again, the frame and the slide, they're going to be the exact same. It's the same holster, so that is a huge plus. The holster that I was running at the range is this T-Rex Arms Ragnarok holster. I have a Safariland QLS fork on the back that I run on a mid-ride setup on my Orion Battle Belt, and these pistols both work equally as good in that holster. I don't have any issues whatsoever because, once again, they're the exact same frame, so that's a huge plus. And in that area, they're matched. We have to get into shootability. When you're looking at a 45 1911, first of all, the recoil on this platform overall is incredibly manageable. You'll hear people time and time again talk about how a 1911 really has no snap, but more of a push recoil, and it's going to push kind of up and back, and it's a very, very manageable gun to shoot. Especially in 45, you're not getting a snappy package whatsoever, especially when it is a steel frame gun like this. 9mm in the recoil department is laughable. There is no recoil with this gun. It feels about like you are shooting a 22. And some might say, well, oh my God, why would that not be a huge positive compared to the 45? Well, in my opinion, the biggest issue here is the slide. When you're looking at steel frame 9mm 1911s, you are seeing a slightly sluggish slide. It's very tough to explain. You got to shoot them a lot to really feel the difference. But when I was shooting them at the range, especially going from the 45 to the 9mm, back to the 45, back to the 9mm, there is a noticeable slowdown in the slide. If you only ever shot 9mm 1911s, you might not feel the difference. But with how strong the slide returns back into battery on the 45, the shootability is just better. It feels better to me. The recoil feels a little bit more proper, Whereas over here, it almost feels like something is going wrong because the slide is moving so slow. So I find myself more times than not kind of having a little bit of a hiccup because I'm almost waiting for that slide for like a millisecond to return. Now I'm really nitpicking here, but I have to do that to compare these two 1911s. When we were looking at grouping between the two, looking at shootability, I did group better with the 45. However, I think a lot of that has to do with the sights. You guys are going to notice, so what we did is I did groups at 5 yards, 10 yards, and 20 yards. So all of those groups were 5-round groups, and you guys can see that the 9mm most definitely shot high. So I was consistently grouping maybe about 2 to 3 inches high. I originally thought this was sighted in, but I haven't shot it in a very long time. It's been banging around in my range bag, so I don't know. I may have accidentally knocked that little screw or something like that, but it most definitely needs to be brought in just a little bit more, especially at 20 yards. You guys are going to see that my shots were pretty much off camera because I was just trying to hold the same point of aim to get the best group that I could. On the 45, I was actually still shooting ever so slightly high. I don't think that's the gun. That's just me getting used to shooting 1911s again because it's been a minute. And overall, still, I would prefer these sights. When we were shooting groups, you can see the huge downfall of the 45 in capacity in the way of how many reloads I had to do to get through those groups compared to the 9mm. So that, once again, is a little bit of a plus there to the 9mm for capacity. Shootability, I have to give it to the 45. It shoots better for me. The recoil feels a lot more positive, and that's the only way I can explain it. More positive recoil, and I love that about the 45, and I have an issue with that with the 9mm. When we're looking at it for a real deal defensive use, this is where once again the 45 beats it out, and it's not for power, which I know a lot of you guys are probably assuming. In my experience, a 45 1911 is going to be more reliable because of that positive cycling of the slide. I noticed at the range, I'm not sure if I caught it on GoPro or on camera or whatever. There was one string of fire that I did where I left my gloves on. With my opposing hand, my non-dominant hand, my thumb ever so slightly snuck up, maybe to about there. But it was just enough material on the glove, I mean, just barely rubbing on the slide, barely touching it. But because that slide is so sluggish and is barely moving back and forth, that caused it to hang up a bit. Now, the moment I took it off, it slid back into battery. But still, if you're looking for a real deal defensive use on that gun, that's going to be an issue, and you're going to see that on 9mm, especially in adverse conditions. That slide is moving slower. If there's mud, dirt, lint, debris, if it's really carboned up, in my experience, you're going to see the malfunctions happen quicker over here than you would on the 45 1911, and that's just the way it is. So for that reason, once again, I would choose the 45 in that type of situation. I do just wish the 45 gave just ever so slightly a better advantage in capacity. Typically, the other plus side with the 9mm when we are looking at defensive use is the 9mm is going to have an easier time chambering hollow points, and that's typically where you see the 45 kind of struggle a little bit. 45 hollow points are very flat and a pretty steep feed ramp, so a lot of the time these guns will have issues chambering hollow points. Now, I'm lucky on all of my 1911s. I actually have never really had an issue with hollow points. The only ones that these had an issue with were Hornady Critical Duty, and that just, it is what it is. You got to test your hollow points in a 45 1911. This one didn't like those. I have others that have fed those no problem, so just test them out. But once again, the 9mm will typically beat it out in feeding hollow points. Man, which one would I choose? Even though the shootability is there on the 9mm for speed, if you were using it as a competition gun, it's going to be there for mag dumping, getting a lot of rounds on target quick. You can do that with the 9mm because of recoil. I would still have to choose the 45 all day. I don't know that I would ever choose a 9mm 1911 over a 45. That's how confidently I could say that. Just the shootability of the gun, how it feels at the range, how the recoil impulse feels, I just like it better. Let me know down in the comment section if you guys agree. I want to hear it. I want to hear your experiences between the two, and I'm sure other people want to see it as well. If you have any other questions about these two pistols or anything else on the channel, please throw them down below in the comment section, and you guys know I absolutely will get back to you. While you're down there, head up to the description, check out those links, and as always, stay tuned for more great content coming soon.